Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with the sort of AI factory race to work? All right, episode 20, the QCI show. Big news today. We have our first guest of the year. We're hot off the press from a prediction show where I promise you absolutely none of them will come true when we revisit them at the end of the year. Today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to go into some prop tech. What's real? What's hype? We're going to talk AI. It's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, welcome back. We told you there were going to be some changes for 26, and there are. We're bringing in the big guns. We're bringing in talent. You guys, I think, are already sick of us after 20 shows. So now the reason for you to watch is for our amazing guests. Chase, how are you doing today? Who do we have on the show?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well because we have, probably the most connected man in prop tech, I would say. We're happy to have Steve Weikal from MIT. Steve, thanks for coming on.
Great to be here. Thank you. I don't know that I'm the most connected person, but you and I have been at this game a long time. You sort of get connected over time, right?
Yeah, it's not the largest universe, but
true. But good universe.
Yeah, that's exactly what the most connected person would say. So, Steve, why don't you do a quick background, quick introduce yourself, my friend, and then we'll get the show going.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. Great to see you. Happy New Year, and delighted to be here on the podcast. I wear a couple of different hats at MIT, principally with a research group within the School of Architecture and Planning at the MIT Center for Real Estate. For those of you who don't know, there's a Center for Real Estate that for 40 years has researched the commercial real estate industry and was founded by some luminaries here in Boston and also one non-Bostonian, Gerald Hines, who was a founder of the center 40 years ago. And at the time, they felt that there were two things missing from our industry. One was some research to understand how our industry operates and to help guide strategic decision making by those of us who are in the real estate business, and then also to train the next generation of leaders. So we have a master's degree program. So it's one of the many research centers at MIT. And the last thing I'll say is that we're in the School of Architecture and Planning, not at the Sloan Business School. And although we still teach finance and economics, it's an interesting place to be, especially now, because of the convergence of real estate and construction and technology through the MIT lens. And then you add to the mix all of those other programs at MIT, material science, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence. This is a time in our industry when it's not just about the building. It's about so much more. And so I'm grateful to be at a place at MIT where there are a lot of really smart people around us that help us have this conversation about real estate.
Yeah, and obviously beyond the focus on commercial real estate, just so the audience knows, part of the reason that we at HQO are partners with MIT, building off of what Steve talked about, is, we typically see the tech world and the commercial real estate world, I think, are a little too siloed, and we need to bring those together. And I truly do not believe there is a better place to do that than MIT, obviously, with the foundation between mathematics, technology, science, and then obviously the discipline focus on commercial real estate. So thanks for being here. And thanks. Gerald Hines is a legend. I have his book sitting right here on my desk. Yeah. So shout out to our friends at Hines as well.
Yeah, so MIT's wicked smart. That's what I got from you there.
I'll mention something about, we've appreciated your partnership over the years, and the MIT, these labs are typically set up with corporate members. They're called members typically, that help fund some of the research and the inquiry. And what's interesting over the 40 years is to look at the portfolio of supporters of the Center for Real Estate has shifted. No surprise. It typically was the traditional real estate companies and those who have been with us a long time, the JLLs and the Colliers and those brand names that we've known in our careers for a long time. But what has happened recently is greater engagement with companies like HQO not the traditional real estate company. Just as I think it's a reflection of how our industry is evolving, that now we engage with companies that are not the typical real estate companies, because the conversation has gotten so much broader.
That's great to hear.
So Steve was also co-host of Strata, which was our major event this past fall. You guys have obviously seen the content. You can go to our YouTube channel and see all that incredible content. Spoiler alert, we are running it back again this year. We've already started to meet about it. It's going to be an incredible time. So we're super, super excited about that. All right, today's show, what we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about the news. Then we're going to do a deep dive with Steve. Then we're going to have some fun at the end of the show. Having that said, I've had a lot of conversations with Chase and Steve over the years, and I know that nothing is going to go to script. And if you know me, I go rogue. So we'll see how we go. Justin, sorry, apologies if we go rogue with the show notes. Anyways, but we'll get started. We are currently on track. Quick hit here in the news, and this does follow the trajectory of the show. DealPath's AI studio, DealPath as a whole, reported record growth for 2025, largely driven by their AI studio. Okay, and now what DealPath, basically the transaction that they're holding, they had about 50 new clients, record number of transactions. Obviously, this is sort of an AI deal, leasing, debt, equity, more capital markets tool, but it was solely driven by their AI studio. And so this is somewhat interesting to me. And the question I have for you guys, and we'll start with you, Steve, is this simply just, DealPath, I guess, riding the wave of the market where you've started to see transactions come up? Or is this a little signal here and a sign that some of the AI sort of innovation and adoption, some of its most powerful features might be in kind of the boring stuff? It might be in sort of the automation of simply deal making, and it might not be those promising robots and sci-fi and drone delivery of buildings. To me, this is a little moment here for the boring AI here.
Well, so was that one, were you tossing that one to me or to Chase?
You, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take it. First, I'll say that Mike Soroka was at DealPath, I think was the first founder of a tech, look, we didn't call it PropTech back then. I think he may have been the first founder that I ever met. So I'm always delighted to see that DealPath is still, one of the veterans, one of the early companies, and I'm glad to hear that they continue to make progress. So we can have a pretty broad conversation about this. Generally, when as you know, we studied a lot of technologies and we studied them through the hype cycle. And so there's always this attention to focus on the razzle dazzle of the robots and the, flying this and autonomous whatever. But sometimes what gets overlooked is just the kind of general blocking and tackling. So technologies might fundamentally change, might completely reinvent processes, blow up the old ones, build the new ones. But in the interim, I think we're always going to be eating around the edges, and that may not be temporary. So to answer your question, we might be overlooking the kind of incremental impact that this new version of AI is having on how we do things in the industry. And to your point, we might find that that's a greater impact than these promises of agentic whatever. But we'll only know when we look back on it and say, oh, that's how it unfolded. So did that help put some color on that question, I hope?
Chase, what's your take on sort of AI's promise as it regards to sort of efficiency and automation, specifically around data and sort of less of that razzle dazzle like Steve was talking about?
Well, I think, I think you've kind of nailed the two buckets. There's probably some shades of gray, but I think there is two areas, which is kind of the hard tech challenges that are very sci-fi. We think about the term that we dislike, smart buildings. Steve, you actually talked about this at Strata in terms of, people working on problem solving, movable walls, and making the physical element of the building more flexible to how people need to use the building. There's some really exciting stuff there. And then I would say there's kind of the less sexy to the broader market of just how commercial real estate uses and adopts IT. I've known Mike at DealPath for a while, and it's always good when the good guys win. I mean, he's a gentleman in every sense. He's a great guy. And for people who don't know, DealPath is essentially, it's like pipeline management for acquisitions and dispositions of property. And in other industries, you would think like that's pretty straightforward, but commercial real estate, even some of the very large, sophisticated institutions were still doing this in email and spreadsheets. So I think, it's a very obvious AI automation use case just for, clicking the buttons of moving deals through. But what I think is very interesting for their potential is if they're starting, with just the management steps of the deal, there's going to be a lot of interesting ways for them to extend throughout the value chain into, underwriting, modeling. I always tell the story of we got into the space because a friend that I had at a very sophisticated, maybe the most sophisticated commercial real estate investor on the planet had a 72% renewal rate in every single discounted cash flow model for all of their buildings. And when I asked him, I was like, how are you getting that number? I think he was joking. I'm not totally sure. Said, I think it's hard coded that way in Argus. And I was like, well, that seems like a major flaw. So I do think the biggest challenge is, it's funny, each bucket has a core challenge. One is just the tech is really hard in the hard tech bucket, and there's going to be all sorts of compliance issues and things like that. And then on the flip side, change management for an industry that, on the basic blocking and tackling of IT was behind. And now they're essentially going to skip a step and figure out how to use these things through natural language command line, which might be the big unlock for adoption for a number of people.
I think one of the interesting things to watch here with regards to this AI adoption, or perhaps this sort of deal flow management. So we talked back in November on the show. I forget what number it was. Justin can maybe cue up the clip. But Barry Sternlicht, the founder of Starwood, came out and basically was incredibly bullish on AI and said that he will be in favor of replacing jobs with AI, and that AI, the jobs that he outlined was specifically the asset management, was specifically these kind of back office flows. So it's going to be interesting to see throughout this year, as DealPath continues to have success, how that reshapes commercial real estate firms, their companies. Is it, if you listen to a lot of the podcasts, there's that constant debate of AI will replace jobs or AI actually create jobs, because people are going to get that much more efficient. They'll produce that much more. The company will produce that much more. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to the headcount in some of these firms.
Or will it enhance our existing jobs?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the third version. I think we're headed into the trough of disillusionment. So we're going to find out a lot about whether this stuff really works or not. Mm-hmm. The other thing to consider possibly is those that we have to remember, our industry is all bespoke. Every frigging part of it is bespoke. And we've got a little standardization on the project delivery, hotel, and residential, but let's face it, it's all bespoke. And so therefore, this process is bespoke. So I wonder if the best application of the AI in these processes is where it really is repetitive. I think we say in the industry that it's all repetitive, but each underwriting exercise is different. And so maybe my sense is we'll rely on the AI where we're not going to lose our job. The little bits and pieces that can be automated to speed things up where it's not mission critical. But the stuff that's mission critical, we have to wait and make sure this technology will really do this to the point where I no longer have to question it or backtest it or run parallel. Yeah. So just a thought about it. Yeah, I don't think it's as easy as just plugging this in and letting it go. I don't think that is a good idea.
We haven't seen any technology shift really work that way. We can go all the way back to the arguments around AC DC with electricity, and it never just plugs in and works for sure.
Well, let's talk about plugging in and working. Microsoft just came out with a new study in January of 2026 right now about the global AI divide. Now, I don't think this is going to shock both of you, but I am super keen to hear your responses, as I know that you were on a call with some folks in Riyadh, I think, earlier this week. But anyway, so let me give you the stat here. A new report shows that the Emirates and Singapore are leading the world in AI usage rates, 60+% of the workforce, while the US is lagging at around 28% of the workforce. adopting sort of AI technologies in their workforce. Now, the juxtaposition here is the United States is by far leading. We've talked about this in great detail in all of the infrastructure investments. So with regard to commercial real estate and development, the United States drastically leads with the build outs, the data centers, and so on. However, we're falling pretty far behind on the adoption. So what does this mean to you? Is this a cultural thing? Is this made apparent in the innovation that you're seeing in Saudi and Singapore now, whereas there's sort of less red tape? Chase, I'll kind of give this one to you first.
Well, I think there's like the low-hanging fruit on this, which you just start with population size. Big moves slower than small. So I think we can probably take some signal from these numbers on that. And then I think, when you're newly developed, like the UAE and Singapore and certain other areas, there's less switching costs. If you're starting from nothing, you can just go to the new thing rather than, there are long-term enterprise contracts and key technology categories for a lot of companies in the US. These areas might not have as much of that. So I think there's probably some natural forces. There's probably some labor dynamics. You see what's happening with, the longshoremen in the United States fought really hard during the election cycle to prevent automation of ports and things like that. And, obviously the way that we're set up is different than some of these other, countries and regions where they can kind of make the decision without consensus or bringing people along, which can be an advantage. It can be a disadvantage in different scenarios. So I think there's probably some, structural reasons that you're seeing uptake, and then just some, population-based reasons. But it will be fascinating to see how that growth curve starts to inflect or not in the United States, because I think it's going to be critical for economic competitiveness. And from what we were talking about on the last topic, the Luddite fallacy is always a fallacy. You could talk about, when we invented the relay, which essentially we used to have people sitting in between telegraphs when copper wire could only send a message 250 miles, and they would translate the information from one telegraph to another. We just added a little bar with a magnet, and it was called a relay. And probably a lot of people thought that was taking people's jobs. Fast forward, 100 years, and significantly more people hit buttons for their job than when the relay came around. I am very bullish that more people will do knowledge work because of AI rather than less.
Yeah. And before I go to you, Steve, we did see significant issues with the relay system because there was a massive Verizon outage yesterday, which just jammed everybody up. So like the hell with that technology. Steve, you are super connected on the international side. You got MIT and you as well. What are your observations here with regards to the folks that you speak to, both here in the States and internationally, about some of this AI adoption?
I'm curious to know on that reporting that you mentioned, what types of jobs and activities are they? What are they measuring? You always have to ask, what's the sample? And this, I would just be curious to know if is it people using Copilot in their day-to-day work, or is it people engaging with LLMs generally to find a restaurant to go to? I would like to better understand what they're measuring and make sure. I would just like to better understand what they're measuring, and we're not going to figure that out here. But unless Greg.
No, I was going to say that's such an MIT response. You want to poke holes at the research, like somebody who didn't go to MIT. Here I am scrambling for my notes to make sure that I'm available.
It's a simple question. Show me tell me what the data set was. Just so I understand.
We don't have it though, and I think that's important though. It's not clear. And I think some of what you're talking about here is we speak too broadly about what AI adoption is. But anyways, I wanted to just comment on that before we keep.
And I always remind people, it's a bit misleading to say AI, because we've been using AI our entire careers. I'm assuming this is LLMs, the latest version of AI, and that I think is a valid inquiry to understand what's the uptake. but back to your question, and I think Chase, I think you're onto something, that there are smaller countries or countries with younger economic systems are more nimble. And we saw that with the adoption of blockchain for registry. And we know there was a whole bunch of hype around blockchain, but very quietly, certain countries, Georgia, Estonia, Dubai, they took it on and started implementing it and putting it into the system. So it's quite possible that is one of many reasons why we would see adoption happen more quickly in different economies, in different countries around the world.
Do you see, when we talk about, and you're sort of trying to decipher the difference of what does AI mean and sort of what are they referring to you? My next question for you is, do you have any good examples in talking to folks about actual agentic usage in properties or in portfolios, rather than just sort of the automated sort of deal path, deal making tools, database management efficiency? Are you seeing any examples? Do you have any examples of where you're starting to see the agentic sort of workflows take over and really automate more important tasks, I guess?
I haven't seen, if you're referring to the agentic where the human is taken out of it, I have not seen that, nor have I heard any anecdotal information in real estate. Although there was that interesting article about one of the banks where they've got the agents are now talking to the agents and the humans are out of it, which is they're a little worried about that. That's the only example that I am aware of, and only because I read about it. That one of the banks was experimenting with the agents. Every employee in this group had an agent. They were doing a trial. Everybody had a doppelganger. Everybody had a mini-me that was this agent. But then they got to talking about how the agents started interacting with one another without talking to the humans. And there could be a lot learned from that. But I'm not seeing at this point, it's the next gen kind of chatbot experience. It's these tools that get added into the process. Nothing where it's a standalone digital kind of being that can make decisions. Not that I've seen. Chase, have you seen anything?
I haven't seen kind of the full agentic experience that, say, we're seeing from kind of the leaders like Claude and folks that are deploying in technology. I think that's relatively natural and to be expected because, technology is great at speaking its own language. So inherently, we're going to see this touch coding first. And the end user adopters and technology are obviously more prepared to begin to leverage these things. But I think in PropTech in particular, probably the folks that have, I think proven they're the furthest along at this is Middle East in the residential space, right? They started kind of AI first before AI was a thing. And obviously Minna over there, who's the CEO, is brilliant. And they just did that big Andreessen Horowitz deal. So I think that's probably the best example that we're seeing in PropTech. And there are certain things on the residential side that have some advantages from a deployment structure, right? Like when you think about the hero user within the industry, you have a pretty good long tail of people that don't have to necessarily go through enterprise IT compliance and requirements and things like that. So Middle East is probably the best example.
Yeah, I would say Elise, also an MIT company. She's an MIT alum. Thanks for that shout out. But I guess, Greg, another question might be, do we understand how an agent is defined? Because if we had said, who's got some of the best kind of chatbot engagement, and I realize chatbot we have to get away from that term because it's already dated, it's already stale.
Yeah.
Do we replace that with agentic, an agent? And if that is the case, I would agree that there's Elise AI and other examples of this kind of engaging with what we think is a human, but it's really this really smart, now LLM enabled tool. Is that what an agent is, or do we have a different definition going for it? I don't know.
That's a very critical call out, particularly for people in real estate, because I think they don't understand chat retrieves information back to you in a more analytical way, I think. And the agent then takes action, right? And so they need to understand, are you going to trust the agent to essentially hit the button, right? And I think in the show notes here, Greg, you called it, do you trust it to turn the dials? I like that. And I think that's where there's, inherent friction, because you got to, trust takes time, right?
Well, there's the new, what is it? It's co-work is from which of the companies? I forget. Anyway, I was reading about co-work, and you give it access to the folder, and the folder has all of the documents in it. And it will generate the slides, it'll generate the summary, it'll generate this, it'll generate that. That to me is starting to look like an agent. So in the future, if I'm an analyst and I've got a deal, I put all the stuff into the deal folder, and I just say, do it. And it analyzes it. That's the first step to your point, Chase. Then if I'm also giving it permission to respond to the other parties, that's kind of interesting, a little scary, right? But then that's hands off. I just press go. It analyzes what I put in the folder. It goes out and gets what it needs. So I'm unclear as to how the industry is defining what this agent, what are the parameters of an agent, quote unquote, an agent.
Or if they're defining it.
Or if they are.
Yeah. Probably not. I mean, I'll give you a definition. Not that you asked me for a definition, but my definition of an agent. And so the issues that I have with most of the agents and chatbots that are out there. So I was trying to book a flight the other day on Delta. And so I go to the chat because I didn't want to pick up the phone and call anybody, contact us chat. And I just get peppered with useless questions and their responses weren't entirely clear. And so I just continue to type agent until they put me in touch with somebody. Now, the real trickery will be if the person or thing they put me in touch with actually is the AI agent. Like that to me is the big trust in where things need to go. The current forms of chatbot just simply can't decipher and establish or push a button. There's a level of trust, and I'm excited to see where things go. And that's sort of like the most, I guess, sort of consumer and user-friendly version, right?
Well, and that line is when you talk to it, can it take the action to book the flight? Because that's the
eventually, yes,
in chat.
And make sure that I, have the right seat that I want, obviously.
Well, there's discussions about being able to now go ahead and process your purchase through them, but still that's clunky, apparently. So I don't think we're seeing it. And the other thing is the really brilliant version of that, we won't know.
Exactly.
Correct. So that we're not going to know when they finally do pass the milestone where it is human-like. We're not going to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, love that. Okay, well, let's keep going. Let's talk about the state of AI and PropTech. What's real? What's hype? Steve, I am going to hit you with a number, some data here, and I want you to respond to it. Jason, opine at any time. So back in 2024, which felt like a very long time ago, but it wasn't, Morgan Stanley and JLL predicted that AI could automate 37% of all real estate tasks, creating 34 billion in efficiency gains by 2030. Okay, so we are, 2 years in, barely, to their prediction. They still got 4 years to go. In your view, Steve, have we started to capture any of that value yet in the last 24 months? Or has the last 24 months been what is the very expensive R&D mode where we're still trying absolutely everything we can't necessarily measure? And so these economic gains, the true sort of KPIs here of automating 37% of all tasks and creating 34 billion in efficiency gains, are we not there yet? What have you seen in the last 2 years? Are we still in R&D mode?
Oh, wow. How do you measure this, and who's measuring it? These predictions are all great, but then does anybody go back and actually track it and measure it and say, we were
5 to 6 years, because it's just long enough for people to forget, and it's just short enough for them to get you to spend some money.
Exactly. Nobody ever goes back. In academia, we get to predict the future in academia because there are no consequences to missing the target. But I don't know, Greg. What I am seeing is certain things are measurable. Some things are not measured. So productivity is so hard to measure. And this is not our problem. This has been for ages, productivity is hard to measure.
Yeah.
And so in real estate, do you measure it by head count? Do you measure it by faster deal flow? Do you measure it by cost, the cost to get a deal done? I think maybe we could measure, are we lowering the cost? Let's maybe go to residential. We might actually learn a lot from residential because there's a lot of volume there to understand. Have costs come down in transaction costs come down in residential as a result of the application of any technology? Maybe that's one way to measure it. Have we reduced our headcount? And have we increased our deal flow and reduced our headcount? That might be something to measure. I think this is an academic inquiry, and to answer your question, I think it's too early because you need something to measure. And I'm not so sure we're capturing that, and I'm not so sure we're far enough into the cycle. Chase, what do you think?
I don't know about the exact numbers that Morgan Stanley and JLL predicted. I would imagine you would go off census data and look at, you can kind of break down the core functions, right? You have people on the capital side, you have people on asset management and building operations, leasing, PM, et cetera. And I think whatever we peg the delta at, I agree with whatever kind of range you could pretty easily back into on when you look at the structure of commercial real estate. It's an industry that is still operating in a mode of a local business. And there's very concrete examples, right? We still have on-premise systems like access control systems when they could operate in the cloud, let alone running AI. And so when you think about who provisions, say, your key to a building, that person does not need to physically sit at the building in a lot of instances. And in most instances, they still do. We're just talking about the cloud wave before we get to task automation. So my guess is this is pretty accurate in terms of the overall efficiency that we can target. Even the sophisticated groups, oftentimes lease approvals and these things still go through a spreadsheet. That's not particularly efficient. I would guess that the big number of 30 something billion is probably pretty accurate, but I might even go on the high end of whatever their range is, but I would like to understand the methodology a little bit more.
Yeah, so go ahead, Steve.
And also, Greg, just to come back to Elise AI, they actually have some numbers on the reduced cost of staffing, the improvement in enclosure. So there is data out there, but I don't think it's enough to aggregate and say, yeah, we've squeezed 38 billion out by this date. But I think we'll get there. I'll also say that on the energy side, remember, Chase, back in the early days, it was the energy startups. It was those that in the PropTech space, the energy startups were able to prove themselves in 3 to 6 to 9. They were able to prove ROI better than anybody. And so that might be one part of it is I bet we could say by this more efficient management of energy using these new versions of AI, we're able to save X, Y, Z. I wish we had that for all of the pieces of our ecosystem. Unfortunately, I don't think we do.
On the other side of that, because I agree, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think you can say we sort of spent this to save this with regards to adoption, but I have some more data for you that I think you'll find interesting. Enterprises, companies in 2025, and this is obviously an estimate, spent around 37 billion. This is by Menlo Ventures, spent around 37 billion in generative AI investment. Now, the way that they've sort of been talking about it is these are AI pilots. Okay. So in 2025, companies spent around 37 billion. As a whole, globally, Gartner said that spending around 2025 was around 1.5 trillion just in AI. That includes consumer. Okay. Well,
Gen AI.
Yeah.
So say it.
Yeah. Generative AI. So I want you to focus on the 37 billion spent by companies. Okay. We were just talking about sort of the adoption and sort of how to measure. Now, when I hear that, and I'm just sort of judging from experiences on us, we're working on a lot of pilots. We're working on a lot of AI pilots. We're trying a lot of things, right? So we're spending 37 billion on pilots. Now, another stat here is that 95% of those pilots have failed, or they failed to reach sort of adoption within the company. Is that saying here that 95% of the 37 billion was sort of quote unquote wasted. Now, my question for you, Steve, with regards to what you're seeing in the world or here in the States or out of MIT, is there a problem with where we are today? We've yet to achieve the measurement. We can't measure it yet, but we're spending 37 billion in pilots. Is that too much? Do we have pilot paralysis here? Is this like a very deadly issue for us that we're just spraying and praying money across all these pilots and the majority of them fail? Should we put our eggs in one basket, or is AI the whole basket and we're piloting ourselves to death here? I don't know.
That's a good question. Is this the cost of R&D to change the world? Look at all the money that's been put into autonomous vehicles for the last 12 years. Remember, we were at the peak and we were going to have driverless cars in 24 months and blah, blah, blah. And we're 10 years into it, and we're just starting to see some of that emerge. I don't know, is that too much? Is that too little? But it's certainly the R&D and the learning process. I know MIT issued that similar report on the 95%, 5%, and it was very controversial. But you have to ask, what are they doing the trials on? We'll only know in the future whether those trials were in the right direction. Was that money spent in the right direction? Did we overlook a whole different area that we haven't started spending money on? I don't know. Let's go back and look, how much money was spent on R&D to create the automotive industry or to CRISPR? How much money was spent on life sciences? And how much failure was there before we had success? I can't answer your question, Greg, as to whether I think this is too much or too little. But it does give companies pause because they have a 12-month cycle and they have to answer to shareholders that the money is thoughtfully deployed, but it's still R&D. It's still R&D. Jace?
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on in terms of the reality of how they think about it. It gives them pause because, everything is quarter to quarter. I think if we were to look at, the Fortune 500 alone does hundreds of billions of R&D per year. It's heavily weighted 20, 30, 40% obviously in tech. But to your point, Steve, automotive is up there and pharmaceuticals and things like that are up there. I think the range for Fortune 500 is 3 to 15% per year goes to R&D, and it's hundreds of billions. So I'm in the camp that 37 billion is the low end of AI R&D. I think we're going to see it go substantially up in 2026. And I do think there's a more structural issue, not necessarily in tech, in automotive, and maybe pharmaceuticals, but in other industries that are lower margin, a bit more commoditized, and have lower R&D budgets. I think those companies, just because of the speed of technology, and now that tech as an industry doesn't really make sense, it's kind of horizontal across industries, right? I think those companies, at some point, people are going to connect performance in vertical industries to R&D, and I think they're going to need to up their budgets. So my call here would be that we see this number go up meaningfully in 2026, maybe 27. In terms of whether it's good or not, I would point to Kathy Wood of ARC did a really interesting presentation at the All In conference back in the fall, where she kind of normalized GDP over the last 150 years and basically said, we don't really have GDP growth when you kind of normalize it, except when you get these massive technology shifts. And she showed what GDP growth looked like during, obviously, the Industrial Revolution. And she had, I think, 5 or 6 categories of everything from robots and generative AI and super intelligence to, everything in gene sequencing and that, where she was predicting that kind of the upper bound could be 17% GDP growth if all of these things play out. So I do think there are moments in time where you need to take the bet on R&D when you have a massive technological shift like this.
Also a good point to look at percent of GDP is a better way to look at it than the gross number, because the gross number is hard to understand context. But percentage of GDP might be an interesting way to look at it. And for the real estate industry, we don't have even the biggest of the big companies, except maybe the Blackstones and the Brookfields, but we don't play at that scale. And so for us to spend hundreds of millions on R&D would be a lot. We're not an industry that does a lot of R&D. And so maybe it's not a bad thing that often we are the slow second. We wait and see what gets adopted by industry in general, and then we apply it to real estate. And we're accused of being slow to respond and slow to innovate. But maybe it's the nature of our business, because we don't have any big dogs that dump a ton of dough into R&D. We just don't do R&D in our industry.
Yeah, and I would view what Saudi and some of these new groups are doing is they are doing exactly that, right? Like with Neom and some of these areas, I think they're being smart. And I think people talk about the challenges with some of the developments, but they're pressing forward, and they essentially are doing R&D and new developments and new cities and all of those things. And I think that's very smart.
So I got a million questions that we're not going to get to, Steve. I am curious, before we sort of get to our last section, as we've been talking.
Do a lightning round, Greg. You could do a lightning round.
That is the last section. Spoiler.
Oh.
He's a lightning round. But one thing that I just keep thinking about is, we're talking about the sort of AI adoption across some of these large organizations. We're talking about how folks like Barry Sternlicht sort of talk and think about it now. While he looks amazing for his age, he's not super young. Steve, what's going on at the MIT campus? And as you are interacting with the future leaders, is there anything that's really exciting that you're seeing with regards to the intersection of AI and PropTech? You mentioned Elise, and there's a handful of others that are MIT alums. Is there anything that we're missing right now that we're overlooking, that the younger generation, the future leaders are there, they're working on, they're talking about, they're thinking about?
I don't think that I can identify anything specifically, other than that people who are coming into our real estate program we aren't quite at the generation of digital natives. We're still a few years away from that. But I teach a course in the fall with James Scott called PropTech Ventures, which is a bit misleading because we look at all technology related to the physical world. And Chase, you've spoken to the group, but they're coming in much more educated and much more fluent. Yeah. And in fact, I've been reading, there's been some reporting on some of these hackathons. These 10 and 11 and 12 and 15-year-old kids are showing up at hackathons with these fully formed AI solutions. They saw a problem in their life and they just did it and built the thing. So that is different. Look, I'm not a digital native. I have to learn this stuff. But they're coming in, this is just the language they speak and the air they breathe. And so that's very exciting because they're already using the tools that we think are cutting edge. And they're already using those on a day-to-day basis. And so they are going to invent the next cutting edge that we can't even predict. That's very exciting.
Are you a big TikToker? You on the talk, Steve?
I'm actually not on the talk.
Neither am I, but Chase is big into the talk.
I got rid of it.
Oh, did you get rid of it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where do people have the time?
Well, that was the problem. I don't. And the next thing I look up, I'm like, wait, I was on this for 16 minutes.
Anyway, but to answer your question, Greg, there's always cool stuff happening at MIT around nanotechnology and micro processors, and they're now going to be the size of a pinhead. And can we embed these breakthroughs in hardware, which is almost not hardware because it's so small? And that will be driven by these new AI applications. So there's a soft side of it and then a hard side of it as well.
What's interesting is you just said the word microprocessor, and I was just watching The Departed last night, and I hadn't seen that in a while. And the scene where he sells the microprocessors abroad is just so interesting to where we are today, talking about stealing of sort of NVIDIA chips and sort of the AI. And yet this is depicting what? Whitey Bulger back in the day? What?
Yeah, it's quaint, right? When you have you've got the little aluminum tin with the roll of film in it, and it's hidden in something. Yeah.
All right, let's get the lightning round.
Yeah, let's get to lightning round. Actually, what's nice about this is, and we got about 5 minutes, so we've got to be very lightning because this is the first time that we're doing a lightning round. Chase, I want to hear your responses to these 3 or 4 questions as well. And the next show, when we have a guest, we already know your answer, so you can't. Okay, Steve, real quick, lightning round. This is called Quantum City 3, although we, I think, have 4 questions because that's what we do. Fast forward 12 months to January 2027. What is the one headline that we'll be reading about commercial real estate that no one is talking about today?
That no one's talking about today? I would say we built too much data center space.
Mm.
But I think people are talking about that already.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was kind of a cop-out. That was super lame. We literally talked about that last show, Steve.
That one was too easy, right?
That's quieted it down. So I think that's a fair answer.
A year from now, we have deployed self-assembling structures in space.
Ooh, good one.
Chase?
Nice. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about the complete and utter bifurcation of workplace. We talk about flight to quality, like it's just a temporary thing. The bottom is dead. I think it will be declared dead, and the top will no longer be called just trophy and flight to quality. It will be the standard.
Jace, I actually think we could say the middle is dead.
Yeah.
Because the bottom is going to get converted into cool new uses. There's going to be a whole segment of the market that is functionally obsolete that we don't know what to do with.
Yeah, I agree.
That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Question number 2, lightning round. Outside of phone and email and now TikTok, what is one piece of technology, hardware or software, Steve, that you personally cannot live without?
That I cannot live without. I don't know that I can't live without it yet, but I really like my Meta smart glasses.
I didn't see you as a Meta smart glass guy. I'm not gonna lie.
They're really cool. Now I don't have the augmented version, and that's going to be badass when they fully develop the augmented version. But I do regularly wear my Meta smart glasses, and they're really cool, and I just get used to them.
Chase?
I'm going to go, I can't live without the different AI tools that I use, but that's boring. Several hundred years ago, the printing press was a really big deal from a technology perspective. I'm going analog. I can't live without my notebook and pen.
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
What about you, Greg?
Z.
What about you?
That's a great question.
Comb?
Here is
Comb?
a comb.
Comb? Did you say a comb? Comb.
You think I wake up like this? You think I wake up like this? My goodness. I had the
amount of technology that goes into that hair. Let me tell you.
That Dyson hair dryer,
Dyson, badass. It's good.
Unbelievable. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I would say my blow dryer, my hair dryer, whatever it is called.
Okay.
No, that's not true. I don't have a good one. I'll think about it as I ask you guys the second to last question. Steve, we talked about quantum cities. We talked about that significantly at the event, Strata, that we hosted last fall, that we're going to be hosting again. Spoiler alert. What is the single most important metric for a healthy city?
Housing cost, but that's easy.
Okay.
Housing, but I think it's so often it comes back to housing. And look at New York, that even though office is still struggling, it's doing better, but it's still struggling. But the housing, the rents were higher, and rents a while ago, they hit that milestone. Rents are higher. People want to live in the city. They want to be where the action is, but they don't want to work there, or they aren't working there. It's an interesting flip. Anyway, that's the best I can say.
I think Steve is spot on in the moment that we're in. I'll go with GDP.
We knew that because we all read your paper. So good one, man. Okay, last question before we wrap. So just this week, friend of the pod, I wish, Matthew McConaughey got approval to trademark really just his beautiful face, his stares, his smiling, his voice, in an effort to effectively protect himself and his likeness and his brand, what he's built. All right. From AI. He wants a clear perimeter around the ownership that sort of he brings to the table. As you think about the entertainment industry and this podcast, hopefully over time, this podcast can just be AI driven, so we don't have to sit here. Steve, if there's anything right now, any personal moves, phrases, teaching habits, quirks in the classroom that you'd like to protect from AI, do you have any? What would they be?
I don't think there is. There's nothing that we want to protect, because in academia we're sort of open source anyway. But I think and MIT's been doing work on this. I think the biggie, one of the many biggies that we have to resolve, is misinformation. And so to have me lecturing and saying things that I am completely opposed to, but it gets out into the world, that's going to be a problem.
What I would protect from AI, Steve, if I were you, is your blue steel stare when you're vamping with the crowd at an event. So I went personal, not academia. I think you really got to protect yourself from that. You don't want that being taken over. And if you do, you want to make sure you get some of those residual checks, my man.
Well, I do want residuals on it. Yes. So anyway, I don't think there's anything, because academia generally is open source, but I think we need to be very careful. We already have a misinformation problem, and now we're adding it. We're making it three-dimensional, and that's going to be a problem.
Listen, that's it for episode 20. What a wonderful show. We're almost an hour here. Had an amazing time with Steve. Thanks so much for joining us. Real quick, where can people find you, Steve? All those listeners that we have, where can they find you?
The Center for Real Estate website. You can go there, find lots of interesting information. You can also look around the other websites at MIT, and my email address is there as well.
So you can find him on the internet. Chase, any parting words?
No, thanks so much for coming out, Steve.
Great to see you guys. Thanks, and enjoyed the conversation. I hope we can do it again.
Amazing. Thanks for coming out, everybody.